All right. I had to make a tough decision, one I have never made at any point in my career, and I'm here to explain it. Take zero. All right. So, as many of you may notice, um, the podcast that we shot on Tuesday, September 5th, that we did a live stream of, Tuesday, September 5th, has been taken down. It was actually taken down twice. Once by us for a read edit, and then a second time yesterday on September 6th. And this video is here to explain, kind of replace that podcast and explain why we brought it down, took it down. In that podcast on Tuesday, we covered a reference architecture diagram or a reference architecture document that Gartner had released on July 31st of this year. Over the summer, while I was on sabbatical, I had literally about 100 people reach out to me. Maybe half of them I knew, the other half I didn't know, to let me know that, hey, someone at Gartner, an analyst at Gartner named Paul DiBiase, had written a document called Reference Architecture for Integrating OT and Modern IT. And it was published on July 31st, and that they were kind of passing it around to customers that they had strategic partnerships with, who were asking about unified namespace. And in that podcast, I told the exact truth, 100% truth, exactly how I felt, the way I normally do. Stream of consciousness, I just let it rip. And the basic message was everyone in our industry, everyone in our community, we feel a certain way about Gartner, specifically their Magic Quadrant and how they go to market and their impact on the market and what they've done for industry. However, this document that I read is a good document. I have some critiques of it, but I think of all the people who have jumped on the UNS bandwagon, all the organizations, all the integrators, all of the OEMs who have jumped on the UNS bandwagon, who are not in our community. That is that they either weren't taught about UNS by me or through IIoT.University. Of all the people who had written stuff, I think this is the best document that's out there. And so my recommendation was, I wouldn't use this as your sole document. If it comes across your desk, you don't have to dismiss it. It's actually a well-written document. There are problems with it, and I'm going to talk about some of those problems in this video. But in the podcast, I went pretty hard. I was pretty passionate. I basically laid out, my experiences with Gartner, what I think about Gartner's Magic Quadrant, how Gartner goes to market, and their impact on industry. And then I evaluated. I just went over the key findings of the reference architecture document. After the podcast was done, you guys may not know this, but I actually don't know what I say when I'm saying it. When I'm on a podcast, I'm doing stream of consciousness. So what I'm trying to do is, basically connect my brain with my mouth, and I just speak based on what the coalescence of all my knowledge. I'm not processing what I'm going to say. I'm not gauging how people might react when I'm in a stream of consciousness. So I actually listen to all the podcasts back immediately. So literally as soon as a podcast is done, I literally listen back. In this case, it was an hour and I think 40 minutes. So I put it on 1.5 speed, and I listened back through. I talked to the team afterwards, and I just said, hey, I think I went a little too hard here. I think I went a little too hard there. I think this part just doesn't apply. I think anybody who's going to listen to it before we upload it to the podcast platforms and before we make it permanent on YouTube, why don't we bring it down, let's do some edits, and then we'll re-upload it. So we did that. We re-uploaded it. And I thought that anything that I thought that might jam some people up, we got out of there, but it turned out that wasn't the case. What happened was yesterday, 2 members of the community reached out to me. They're both, all people in the community are important, but these are people whose opinions I really, I genuinely care about. I have a lot of respect for them. One of them is an end user, a customer, and the other one is a partner. And both of them reached out and they asked that we take the podcast down. They agreed with everything that was in the podcast. They didn't have any objections to what was in the podcast. They didn't have any objections to any of the statements, but they have been working together with our team for about 2.5 years trying to get a unified namespace architecture into this very large organization. It's an organization who has a strategic partnership with Gartner, and there's tens of millions of dollars on the line, and Gartner has some pretty strong opinions on the direction they should go, and have really and both executives internally at that organization as well as Gartner have been holding up approval of the unified namespace architecture. In fact, they've been recommending going in a different direction. However, it's clear that Gartner wrote this document, probably in part to give to this customer. So, or maybe they didn't actually. The client and our partner both felt that the podcast could give the last few remaining holdouts in their organization the ability to shift the conversation from facts to personality. If they were able to point to that podcast, they would be able to try and distract the rest of their team from the facts, which is unified namespace is the only, that I've ever seen, and that anyone in our community has ever seen, scalable Industry 4 architecture for digital transformation. That doesn't mean that you can't use another architecture, but if you want to achieve the goals that everyone is trying to achieve, that is connect, collect, store, analyze, visualize, find patterns, report and solve, and then connect in a digital supply chain so that you can make products that get better after your customers buy them, or you want to make data your primary commodity, then UNS is the architecture for you. They were concerned that the podcast might negatively impact their project. My initial response was no. I weighed it and I said, we have a greater responsibility to the total community. We have a greater responsibility. We must. My reputation is built on calling it like I see it and telling the truth. I have fuck you money. People can't hurt me financially. And so I have a moral responsibility to tell the truth. This is one of the reasons I respect Rick Bellotta as much as I do, because Rick, who also has fuck you money, he has parlayed that into being a voice of reason and a person who tells it like it is in our industrial community, and that's why I respect him as much as I do. We have a moral responsibility to tell it like it is. We may not always be right, but we got to tell it like it is. So the initial response was, we have a bigger responsibility, bigger than any one project, bigger than any one client, and we got to keep it up. We have a bigger responsibility. I then had a conversation with both of them later, and we came to a compromise. It ultimately boiled down to the fact that I have a duty to all members of the community, including these two people. And while Gartner and the people who want to go with Gartner's recommendation can't hurt me, they could hurt these guys. And so what we decided to do was pull the podcast down. I've never done that before in my career. It is not likely I'll ever do it again. But it was a scenario where I thought it was the right thing to do. And this video is an explanation of what my thought process was and why it is we ultimately pulled the video down. I am going to go over the document and the same information that I wanted to share with the world. I'm going to go ahead and share in this video, but I wanted you to know the reason why we took the video down. Let me say this, and we're going to go over the document that they have here in a moment. My feelings on, let's say in a year, I probably receive no fewer than at least 1,000 messages every year where the subject is just Gartner. The Magic Quadrant, what do I think of this quadrant? What do I think of this paper they wrote? What do I think of this? What do I think of that? And my responses are generally the same, okay? Gartner has a lot of wonderful people working there. They got a lot of really brilliant people working there. But the fact of the matter is that since the late 1970s, Gartner has been a pay-for-play analyst organization. That is, all of these reports that come out from Gartner, every single person that you see on the Magic Quadrant paid to be there. Now, they didn't pay for their spot on the quadrant, but they paid to be on the quadrant, okay? And paying to be on the quadrant guaranteed them a spot on the quadrant, okay? Obviously, that's problematic because if Gartner is holding themselves up to be someone, to be an impartial evaluator of technology, solutions, and strategies for manufacturers and industry, then they need to be impartial. This is why I preach agnosticity all the time. My companies are all agnostic. Any strategic partnership that we enter into with anyone is built on the foundation that we will always do what's optimal and best for the client. We will never prioritize the partnership over the client, ever. So if just because I'm going to get a 20% kickback for, I'm going to get, let's say with Ignition, for example, if you're a premier integrator, or at least this is the way it used to be, I'm not sure if it's that way now, but with inductive automation, for example, if I'm a premier integrator selling Ignition licensing, there's going to be a discount and I'm going to get a piece of the licensing sale. Okay. Well, let's say that the piece of the licensing sale that I get from Ignition is a greater piece than I would get with Platform B. But Platform B objectively is a better solution for your client. If you're money driven, if you're money motivated, if you're profit driven, and you're not values driven, then there is an incentive to choose what's best for you over what's best for the customer. Okay. The problem I have with Gartner's Magic Quadrant is that when you look at the way that they break down especially the IoT platform quadrant, when you look at the way they break things down, there's no way to justify what's on the quadrant. I mean, in fact, they have products on there that don't belong there. They have products that belong there, but oftentimes I'll see, they'll have products that are on the quadrant that belong there, but they're in the wrong section of the quadrant, or there are many products on there that don't belong there at all. Okay. I put no weight in Gartner Magic Quadrant at all. Any client that talks to me, asks me about Gartner's Magic Quadrant, I just basically explain to them, here is how this works. And while that might be a resource you could look at, it can't be a resource you use to make your decision. Okay, it's just like how to win friends and influence people. Someone had asked me, "Hey Walker, what books have you read for self-improvement, that kind of stuff?" I said, I've read them all. And which ones have you employed? Outside of any Stoic books, Marcus Aurelius or stuff from Ryan Holiday, I don't employ any of it. I read How to Win Friends and Influence People to figure out who's using those strategies on me. I read Jim Collins's Good to Great to figure out who's using those strategies. I could identify it. If I read the book, I could see. It's the same thing with Gartner's Magic Quadrant. I read Gartner's Magic Quadrant. I read the papers that they come out with so that I can figure out who's listening to them. So when I'm working with a client, I can tell when someone's recommending this platform or that platform, or I can tell who's getting that information from Gartner as long as I read it. All right. That being said, all things that Gartner creates is not garbage, in my opinion, or can't be trusted. But I would always expect, I would always encourage an independent review of anything that Gartner recommends. That goes for Forrester, that goes for McKinsey, that goes for enter in any other big consultancy or analyst firm. Okay. I've had many customers. In fact, I was visiting a strategic partner one time, and while we were at that strategic partner, they asked us to turn our cameras off, and the executive I was meeting with said, "Hey, listen, I just wanted to say something off the side. I agree with everything you say about Gartner 100%. And you know what? We paid too, but we had to. I mean, I don't like it, but it's the way the game is played. I've heard that multiple times. Does that mean that Gartner's an evil organization or anything? Of course not. What it means, though, is that you can't prima facie, that is, at face value, you cannot trust anything that Gartner tells you, because what Gartner is telling you is corrupted by money. And if you do your homework, there's plenty of evidence of that out there. Okay. All right. So let's get to this document here. So in the end, what I decided to do is take down the podcast. There was a compromise with the client and our partner. We agreed that I would shoot this video, and that I could say the things that I'm saying right now, as long as the podcast wasn't down. And what I'm going to do now, as long as the podcast was down, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and go through the document just like I did in the podcast. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look here. All right. So this is the document. It is reference architecture for integrating OT and modern IT. Published July 31st, 2023, and it's written by Paul DiBiase. Okay. Paul DiBiase is a distinguished VP analyst at Gartner, and he's a self-described distinguished VP analyst. Paul DiBiase did not reach out to me, did not consult with me on anything about the unified namespace or anyone on our team or anyone in our community. Okay. This document is overall, it's a good document. Okay. Is it a perfect document? No. Are there problems with it? Yes. I'm going to point out a couple of them. We're not going to go through the entire document because Gartner sells this. Okay. They sell this document. And so I'm just going to go over the overview and key findings, which is basically the cover sheet that they share with everyone. But it is a 34-page document. I am just going to go over the key findings. So organizations are striving to modernize their industrial operations, but are hampered by aging architectures. This document helps I&O technical professionals overcome this challenge by describing an IIoT reference architecture, explaining its components, and analyzing its strengths and weaknesses. Okay. Just by the fact that Gartner wrote this document, they are hedging their bets. Up until July of this year, Gartner has been, because of the strategic partnerships they have with the vendors who pay them to get on the quadrant, Gartner has been saying the things to their strategic partners who are end users that the people on the quadrant want them to hear. Okay, that's what they've been saying. They've been supporting those partnerships. Now, all of a sudden, because and it's not just this one client here, but there are many clients who have strategic partnerships with Gartner. But now, because the UNS wave is something you can't defeat now. The unified namespace architecture is a superior Industry 4 architecture. Okay, if you're an integrator who is competing against, who doesn't use UNS, that is, you use point-to-point linear integration, or you use digital thread as your architecture, that integrator is going to get killed by another integrator who's using UNS. If you're a manufacturer who is a digital thread, let's say you go Microsoft or Rockwell Stack, Connected Enterprise Stack, you're going to get murdered by the competitor who is using a unified namespace. It's just not possible to. I mean, I was literally I was consulting with a company this morning who they're asking me to be an advisor on their board of directors. And I was telling them about a digital transformation initiative we've been working on for 3 years with a very large manufacturer. They have 46 facilities all over the world, millions of data points, tens of thousands of devices. We've been working with them for 3 years, full stack UNS architecture, total spend by that customer is $2 million in 3 years. $2 million. That's it. Okay. There was a $100 million bid, a $100 million bid by one of the big firms. And to date, yeah, they're already at the machine learning phase. This client is 3 years in, $2 million, full UNS stack. Okay? Full UNS stack, and they're deploying all their machine learning initiatives now, and they're in for $2 million. You can't compete. And Gartner has obviously discovered that. When you take a look at their partners and what they're quoting and how much they're quoting for these initiatives, and what an integrator or a partner who's using a unified namespace is quoting, there's no way to compete. You just can't compete. Okay? And Gartner knows it. And that's where this document came from. Okay? All right, key findings. The hierarchical levels and point-to-point connections of the Purdue model require developers to integrate a disjointed set of incompatible vendor-defined APIs. The result is a proliferation of incompatible interfaces that make it difficult for developers to discover, access, and analyze business data trapped in disparate operational technology systems. It's actually, this first bullet point is true. It's the first time I've ever seen Gartner shit on the Purdue model. I've been saying for 5 years the Purdue model is deprecated. This is the first time that Gartner's ever admitted it. Okay, they've never admitted it before until now, and there's a reason this document is staying under the radar. Okay, there's a reason there's not some big, press statement or something about this. Okay, also they hedge their bets here and they try to point out that the result is a proliferation of incompatible interfaces that make it difficult for developers to discover, access, and analyze business data trapped in disparate operational technology systems. It's not just in OT systems, it's in IT systems too. This is true for IT. IT also uses vendor-defined APIs, not just OT systems. But the reason it's put in this document is because there is a disparity between what Gartner and other consultancy, these other analyst firms have been saying for the last 10, 13 years and what they're saying now, okay? So what they're trying to do is control the message, which by saying that this issue is an OT issue, it's not. It's an OT-IT issue. Number 2, the Purdue model assumes that architects isolate OT systems from IT systems. The IT-OT isolation creates zones of trust that protect OT assets. However, the Internet of Things has blurred IT-OT boundaries, broken down zones of trust, and exposed attack surfaces. Okay, again, they dump on the Purdue model again, but you have to ask the question, why were networks, OT networks and IT networks, bifurcated? Why do you have OT and IT infrastructure? The myth is that it was for security reasons. The reality is that IT policies prevented OT professionals from innovating the infrastructure. And so in order for IT departments to be compliant with whatever security requirements that has been passed down through their chief technical officers and through their IT groups, what they did was they just broke apart the IT and OT departments and said, controls group, engineering group, you guys own that. You have your own network out there with your own rules. And at the moment you get to this switch, you're on our rules. Purdue isn't what told you. Purdue was a reaction to that structure. Purdue was not the definition of that structure. Okay. Bullet point 3. A new industrial IT-OT architecture is emerging to improve data accessibility and reduce asset vulnerability. It will be built upon an event-centric integration pattern that will use MQTT brokers, the Spark-Plug-B standard, and a unified namespace UNS design strategy. It will also use OT asset discovery and protection platforms. Okay. Unified namespace is not a new architecture. It was the first unified namespace was built in 2005 using dynamic data exchange in a salt mine in upstate New York. I told this story. I put this on LinkedIn a couple months ago. Told the story about the first UNS that I ever built in 2005, using dynamic data exchange. So Data Highway Plus to OPC DA, DDE into Excel, and then we built the topical namespace using the topic namespace structure in Dynamic Data Exchange. That was the very first unified namespace. Okay. Since 2005, I've implemented UNS in thousands of manufacturers. Thousands. Okay. In 2012, the UNS architecture, the project that made me famous, where I won my first major award, in 2012 and 13, we used the UNS architecture to do a 5-state supervisory control and data acquisition system for an oil and gas customer, 14,000 locations, 40,000 devices, 2 million daily alarms, 2,000 concurrent users, 11 million data points across 5 states, most of the infrastructure over Wi-Fi and VSAT, or over cellular and VSAT. We did that whole project in 18 months for $1.6 million. And the next closest bid was $25 million, which was never really considered. And the bid closest to that was $50 million. It was 2012. Okay. You look at a digitally mature organization, a company that is 1 or 2 standard deviations above the mean in digital maturity, and they have UNS. This is not new. I'm 49, and my entire career is built on this architecture. It is not new. We have 400 videos over the last 5+ years talking about unified namespace. This is not new. I personally know of at least 100 startups in the last 4 years that were derivatives of unified namespace. Okay? Or derived from unified namespace. Number 2, UNS does not use MQTT brokers. It uses broker technology. Doesn't have to be MQTT. And SparkPlug-B is not required. SparkPlug-B is a standard you can use and often do use for parts of your namespace. If you're going to be using MQTT, if you want to use SparkPlug-B, you're going to be using MQTT. But you can also use AMQP, which is Microsoft's broker technology. You can use DMP3. You can use any broker technology. The requirements are pub/sub, edge-driven, report by exception, lightweight, open architecture. Event-driven and stateful. That's pub/sub. Okay? Number 4. The SparkPlug-B standard provides important extensions to MQTT, for example, report by exception. Report by exception is native to MQTT. It doesn't come with SparkPlug-B. SparkPlug-B is a mechanism for packaging industrial data for MQTT in a node-centric or device-centric architecture. So if I want to make the device or the node the centerpiece of the universe, SparkPlug-B is very appropriate. Okay, but it never added report by exception in. These are some of the critiques I have, but they're all minor. These are minor critiques. However, these are all things I could have fixed if this Paul DiBiase had reached out to me. All you got to do is Google unified namespace, and Walker Reynolds is the first person who comes up. If you're writing a document about unified namespace and you don't contact me, okay, and you're not part of our community, you're not part of IoT.University, if you haven't learned from us or one of our partners, then you don't have the authority to write the document. Okay, you don't have the authority to write the document. Okay, but SparkPlug-B has technical limitations. The inability to handle command response use cases, for example. That isn't true. I talked about this in the podcast. SparkPlug-B can handle command response. Okay, it's very simple. Topic payload for command, consumer subscribing to the command payload, to a topic, to formulate the response, publish back to the response payload, and then any of the consumers for that command response cycle can receive the message, the response. There are technical limitations to SparkPlug-B. Number 1, it's device-centric, and really, I'd prefer that it was instrument or data point centric. Okay, but it is device-centric. Device would be PLC, sensor, edge node, industrial PC, right? That's a device. Instrument would be something like the temperature sensor itself. Okay, but it can handle command response. one of the biggest limitations is that by default, broker technology is asynchronous, not synchronous. That's one of the biggest limitations from a technical perspective. But there are no use cases. There's never been a use case that has come across our table in the nearly 20 years I've been building UNS that we couldn't do with UNS. Okay? The UNS design strategy improves access to OT data, but requires collaboration across many different roles and teams. All architectures for Industry 4 require collaboration across many different roles and teams. Let me say it again. All Industry 4 architectures require collaboration across many different roles and teams. Why? Because by definition, OT-IT convergence is the convergence of two separate domains owned by two separate groups. And then let's go through recommendations, and then we'll call it a day. So I can't share the document because I know they sell it. So recommendations. Modernize industrial edge architecture by transitioning from a Purdue model toward an event-centric integration pattern. Deploy event brokers that support MQTT5 as the backbone of your design, and assure that the brokers provide Sparkplug-B aware compliance. I am totally okay with that recommendation. I would argue though, in the spirit of this document, that I wouldn't call out MQTT specifically. I would say broker technology, and if you choose MQTT, deploy event brokers that support MQTT5. Here's why it should be 5 and not 3.1.1. MQTT5 added in mechanisms, actually added in some of the features that were created in Sparkplug-B. I would also argue don't use Sparkplug-B, use Sparkplug 3, which is the newest version of the Sparkplug standard from Eclipse. But I'm okay with this recommendation. It's a good recommendation. Number 2, use by the way, the biggest line in there from Gartner specifically is modernize your edge architecture by transitioning from a Purdue model. I mean, we've been saying this for 5 years, more than that. I mean, I haven't been using Purdue since 2015. So, we shot 400 videos, and in many of the videos I talk about Purdue is garbage, it's useless, get rid of it. Number 2, use their cyber physical security protection platform to discover your OT assets before defining your namespace data hierarchy. Use the same CPS/PP to protect your OT assets and integrate with IT security tools, such as security information and event management. I don't agree here, but I'm not going to nitpick that it's in the wrong order, okay? You define your namespace hierarchy first, and that is a function of your operation. One of the most important things to understand is that if you look at the most digitally mature organizations in the world, their digital infrastructure is a reflection of the reality on the plant floor. Therefore, it's driven from the OT reality rather than a enforcement of a predefined model that comes from IT. That's one of the fundamental problems with digital thread. It's one of the fundamental problems with linear point-to-point integration, okay, is that all of those other architectures are top-down, where I define a model and I try to force it on the edge rather than creating a model that is an exact representation of the reality, and then I reconcile or abstract to my information model, okay? And then the last one is define an MQTT Sparkplug namespace data hierarchy for your OT assets by using ISA 95 Part 2 equipment model. Pilot your MQTT Sparkplug namespace in one facility before deploying a multi-facility solution. Test capabilities such as data water discovery, report by exception, reliability, and scalability. I'll say one other thing here. It doesn't necessarily have to be in one facility, okay? It can be one asset. It could be one area. You could pilot in one area. You could pilot in one asset. But the recommendations I mostly agree with. Let me say this. In summary on this document, this is a good document. I would not use this document as my single authority for building my architecture. What I would do, though, is I would use this document as a reinforcement from the holdovers who still put faith in Gartner to steer them right, okay? And I would only use it as a reinforcing tool. That's all I would do, okay? Here's why. There are some basic things that Paul got wrong in here, but they're not major things. Okay. I mean, for example, if you read this recommendation, you will never consider AMQP or DNP3. Moreover, you will definitively use Sparkplug B. There is no mechanism in here to explain where Sparkplug B is appropriate and where it's not. There is also no discussion in here about unification of what we refer to as flat topical namespaces along with structured topical namespaces like Sparkplug B device nodes. Okay. All right. Let me say this. I thought long and hard about the decision to pull down the podcast and shoot this video. I probably won't ever do this again, but it was the right decision. I mean, I did, at the end of the day, when I woke up this morning, I sent a message to my team. You know, I slept on, after we made the decision last night to pull the podcast down and I'd shoot this video today, I woke up this morning, I sent a message to my team and I said, you know, I feel like a sellout. And one of my solutions architects messaged me and he said, you know, Walker, it sounds like you exercised humility and transparency with the entire community and you lived up to your duty to protect those community members who have put their faith in you, this community, and this architecture. And so with that, I feel right with the decision. I want to leave with this. I'm going to read something from my Discord post last night when I informed everyone in the community about this decision. You know, I appreciate every single one of you. Okay, we have an amazing community and we are fundamentally changing our industry. Each month, we make more of a difference. However, making a difference requires a seat at the table. This decision is in service of our current community members and our future impact. And so I hope that everyone in the community appreciates the thought and effort that went into making this decision. And for those of you who are disappointed that I didn't leave the podcast up, and I stand by every single word I said, all I ask you to do is stay tuned. We'll shoot something in the future that conveys the exact same message. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, comment down below. Appreciate every single one of you, and we'll see you in the next one.